Good morning, guys. It's me, Mrs. Snook. How are you today? So today we're going to be getting into our next unit, which is our unit about culture. And I think this is one of my favorite units to teach in sociology. I realize the first unit is kind of just the basics. It's kind of at times, especially as we're talking about stuff you've already learned, like the scientific method. But I really enjoy this chapter. This is kind of what sociology is all about. We're going to be talking about different parts of American culture, analyzing them from a different perspective so you can kind of understand why sometimes people around the globe think of us strangely. We're going to be talking about other cultures around the world, and we're going to be doing a project this chapter so that you can kind of understand some of the important aspects of other cultures. And we're going to be looking at who the people are and what are their beliefs, what are their values compared to American beliefs, American values. So we'll have one more test this quarter for sure on chapter 2, and I don't know how much we'll get into our next unit. Normally we get a lot further. It seems like everything is taking a lot longer now with distance learning and with block, and I know some of you already feel very overwhelmed. Not to fear about that. I do have an extra credit assignment posted for this week, so hopefully that will kind of ease some of your fears about grades and tests and whatnot. I'll be putting some of that into the computer today. So let's get into it. So this chapter is all about culture, and we're going to be talking a lot about what are the key components of culture. That's going to be one of our learning goals that we're going to address next class. Today we're going to just be talking about what is a culture compared to a society and getting into some of the vocabulary for the chapter. You will have a vocabulary assignment coming up as we talk about some of the key terms such as culture, society, material culture, non-material culture. We're going to be talking a lot about cultural diversity, so how it compares to other culture, and we're going to be talking a lot about conformity. So what pressures do Americans feel, or do any people feel, to blend in, to conform to their society's ways of doing things? And you can see some pictures there at the bottom of some different people around the world. So the first thing to talk about is just what is culture? And normally at the beginning of the unit, I have you do some kind of, KWL chart to see how much you already know about a topic, what you know, what you want to know, what you learn at the end of the unit. But I think that culture is an interesting kind of topic because I think that you already have a basic idea of what it is. This is a concept that you've, kind of talked about throughout the years during different social science classes, going all the way back to elementary school as you learned about different cultures. So culture, just a quick way of saying it, this will be one of the answers in the Ed puzzle, it's just a group of people's way of life, okay? And ultimately, it's their way of life, and it can encompass their beliefs, okay, which are personal to them, the group's overall values as far as what they feel is important, and of course, it's going to, include different possessions that the people feel strongly about and that they use on a daily basis. So a group of people's culture, okay, and society are sometimes used and kind of switched, but they're two separate things. Culture is really about a group of people's way of life. It may include their beliefs, it may include their values, and it's definitely about the material and the non-material possessions that they use on a daily basis. But culture is technically different than a society, even though those terms are often used interchangeably. So material culture are the physical objects that a group of people have used. So if we were talking about, the first humans, going all the way back to something that you might have studied in World History Honors or in Ancient Civ, if you took those classes, we talked about like Homo habilis, who was considered the handyman who first used tools. So we're talking about literally people trying to, chip away the earth and trying to use a bone or a stick to create some kind of tool. Or Homo erectus, who was the first to really kind of create fire and also, is an upright human. So those people, their physical or material culture is very limited. They have very limited clothes. In some cases, it's more so about them just moving or migrating to go to a different environment because, they're going to just have very limited loincloths and things to wear. So they don't have a lot of clothes per se. They don't have a lot of tools. It's just what they can make. Their children have pretty much no toys, except for perhaps rocks and things, but their material possessions are very limited. And not all societies place a huge importance on material possessions, even in our modern day culture, okay? We look at the United States as a whole. And we do have separate groups living within the United States. We have what's referred to as basically subcultures. And one of those, of course, is the Amish or the Mennonites. Those are groups of people who do not feel that technology is important. And so they've resisted, right? In terms of, you're not going to find those people with cell phones or cars. They're still using horse and buggy. They're still going to be using just very basic kind of clothing to meet their needs. They're not interested in designer brands or handbags or anything of the nature, or expensive shoes. So the physical objects that a group of people use, they're using them to, of course, meet their daily needs. You know, if you've ever learned about Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom of this pyramid, you have basic needs as far as food and shelter and safety. You know, they're not focused on, you know, being famous or being celebrities or anything like that if we're talking about the Amish or the Mennonites. So just basic goods that they're going to be using to get through the day and to be able to live and to survive for sustenance. Of course, if you're thinking about American culture, our material objects are vast and varied. You know, we've got material objects which are great symbols of our nation, such as our flag. We've got material objects such as a dictionary, whether you're talking about a physical paper dictionary or more of a digital version of a Webster's dictionary, so that you can keep track of our language and how, you know, to keep spell things. That helps people to have, you know, certain rules about spelling and grammar so they can communicate. It could be all sorts of things like clocks. Time is very important in American culture. And so we have, you know, either time, you know, everywhere posted, whether it's on a website or in a classroom with a physical clock, your iWatch, your cell phone, okay? Obviously the clothes, the shoes, the cars that you drive really kind of designate a social class or a status in America. So, you know, most of us, especially for your first car, we're just happy to have a car. I can tell you that I drove for years my parents' minivan because I was too broke and I was saving the money I earned at my job in high school for college. And so I just borrowed their car. I didn't have my own car into my college years. And then it was their old piece of crap minivan, which I was able to buy from them. Woohoo. But if you do have a nicer car, good for you, and hopefully it runs. But you know, that's obviously a symbol, a status. People want, you know, big, fancy, flashy cars, and of course, sports cars and such. So people aren't just buying cheap cars that get them from A to B. Most Americans want, you know, that emblem, that symbol on their car that designates who they are in terms of money, status, fashion. Same thing with clothes. You know, a lot of people are interested, especially in tennis shoes. You know, what kind of shoes are you buying? Are you buying generic, you know, off-brand shoes from Walmart, or are you buying, you know, the fancy Nikes or Under Armours or whatever it is? And yet again, there's way more expensive shoes than that, but I'm just trying to give you some examples. So material culture isn't just about clothes and shoes and toys and cars. It's about perfume and music and makeup and fashion and holidays and traditions and physical foods. All of that is part of our material culture. Now, our non-material culture really is value-based, and it has a lot to do with what's important to us as a group of people. And honestly, as Americans, we care a lot about fashion, we care a lot about beauty, we care a lot about status. And so since those are some of our values and our beliefs, we've created products that match those values and beliefs, which is why we spend so much money on makeup or fashion or clothes. So it's kind of like our non-material culture dictates our material culture, if that kind of makes sense to you. Same thing with like having a certain body image. Americans are obsessed with being skinny, with having a certain look, which is why it's portrayed in magazines, in the media, in social media, with influencers and things of that nature. And it's really unattainable. It's why the beauty industry is millions of dollars. It's why the weight loss, you know, industry is billions of dollars that people can possibly make. Another side of our non-material culture I mentioned before was language. And I talked about how obviously, you know, one of our first dictionaries in America was made by Webster. And it was an actual paper dictionary, and now you've got, you know, online dictionaries, you've got urban dictionaries, but language is so important to a group of people. It reflects their values, it reflects what they care about. As people come up with new slang words from one generation to the next, words that your parents, your grandparents might not be familiar with, that may reflect your values, what's important to you. I'll take the word sick, for instance. My cousin's about 10 years younger than me, and I can remember him, in the kitchen a few years ago talking about how, oh, that's sick. And my grandma was very confused at the time because he was talking about a video game and she didn't understand how a video game could be sick, how it could catch a cold. She obviously didn't, grasp this concept that he was saying that it was sick, it was cool, he was awesome. It really didn't make sense to her. So slang changes over time and it reflects what's important to us, our values, what our interests are. And then obviously we write those down and then it becomes part of our material culture, right? As it goes into like an Urban Dictionary, a real Webster's Dictionary, whether it's paper or digital. Now, I was talking before about how culture is different than society. So remember, a culture is a group of people's way of life and includes their beliefs, their values, their traditions. It's passed on from one group to the next, either orally or by showing people what to do. And it's often misinterpreted or confused with society. And people often use those words interchangeably, but that's not true. Culture also consists of the group of people's material items that they use, the physical objects I mentioned. And then the non-material culture is more so their values, their beliefs, which then physical objects are kind of created to represent that. Okay, now let's talk about the difference between society and culture a little bit more. So when we're talking about culture, okay, culture really focuses, as I said, on the physical products that people make, okay? So when we're talking about the physical products that people make, the material culture, okay, I've got jeans in the bottom picture there because Americans love jeans. Jeans started in the middle of the 1800s as work clothes for farmers, factory workers, ranchers, because they were tough, they were durable, as Levi Strauss came out with them. And today, of course, jeans are considered, the classic fashion icon that you can wear at all sorts of different events. And it's not just made for people who are working in factories or cattle ranchers or farmers by any means. Other groups of people, though, would never wear jeans. You're not going to see every group of people on the planet wearing that. So the physical products that a group of people produce reflect, in a sense, the material and the non-material culture. Physically, people think that they have a certain look, a fashion, but they also represent our non-material culture because, yet again, Americans like jeans. They like the way they look in jeans. I think that they, can be worn in multiple occasions in different circumstances. If they can be dressed up, they can be dressed down. But yet again, that just kind of reflects our society and our values. Not every group of people on the planet would be wearing jeans. Now, the difference between culture and society is really about the people, okay? So even though people intermix those terms, that's not true. When we're talking about a society, it's just the people themselves who usually live in a certain territory with geographic boundaries. So if I'm talking about, let's say the inhabitants of Israel, okay, the Jews, that is a specific society. Once I start talking about the food that they eat, their traditions, their holidays, their yarmulkes, the different clothing, then we're getting into their specific aspects of their culture, whether it's material or non-material culture. And I've got some more pictures here down below. So you're thinking of jeans, that's related to a group of people's culture, the products that they make. Even apple pie, okay, yet again, related to products that they make, which most people associate in terms of American values as, it's as innocent as it's normal as American apple pie. But of course, apple pie is not really an American food. We know that many Europeans for years, Germans, Poles, different groups in Eastern Europe, ate apple pie. So yet again, people associate that with an American food, but it's really not. Okay, that was passed down to us from other groups. Same thing here, I've got some pictures of some people who were wearing hippie type clothing, right? Going back to our 1960s, who's also got some people who are doing some perhaps disco dancing back into the 1970s. Yet again, this reflects the material culture, the clothes that were important to them, their non-material culture, their different values perhaps. But if we're focusing on the group of people themselves, we're talking about the society, okay? The culture is all about the objects. Now, when we're talking about America, one of the questions as well is, how does everybody get along in America? And there's been different theories over the years about, this cultural diversity and this process of what we call assimilation or kind of mixing together. And the question is America one big country where everybody gets along and everything is just kind of mixed over time? Or do people still retain their own unique cultural identities from whatever country they originated in? So one theory, you might have remembered this from history class, we talked about it in US history or APUSH or whatever you took, is the melting pot theory. So obviously, if you take a big pot and you start, I don't know, melting cheese and, butter and sauce on the stove, and you're making, cheese sauce for mac and cheese, or you're making a chocolate fondue, whatever it is that you are melting together, a bunch of crayons perhaps, whatever you're going to get, eventually it's going to blend together into this one big pot of whatever, cheese sauce, chocolate fondue, mixed colored crayons, which all look brown perhaps. And what they're getting at is that if you think about the United States as a whole, we are this blend that, people, it doesn't matter where they came from, if they were Chinese or Irish or Italian or Mexican or Russian. Come the 4th of July, everybody's an American. People are going to parades, at least prior to COVID, and they are, blowing off fireworks and wearing red, white, and blue and proud to being an American. And, they are proud of singing our national anthem, and flags are displayed everywhere. So we do have this unique culture and heritage and way of life. And it's all is kind of mixed together. And people, if you ask them their favorite food, they love Italian food and they like German food. They might like Greek food. Maybe they'll try Indian food. They want to try all these different foods. And they want to eat at these ethnic restaurants. And, they don't just want to eat at McDonald's perhaps every day of their life. So what they're getting at is that the different cultures have mixed together over time. So this is the idea of what we call assimilation, that there's been like a blending, okay? Think about what is similar, right? And so if we're comparing things that are similar, this is the process of assimilating. Assimilation has been forced on different ethnic groups over time, where they really felt forced to become a true American. Obviously, if you want to gain American citizenship and you've emigrated from another country to the US, you're going to have to learn about its culture, its history, its traditions, pass that citizenship test, which is very similar to like your Constitution test that you take in 8th grade, in order to become an American. But we have no national language, so it's not like you have to per se, learn English. However, most people do, because that's what's commonly spoken, and they want to be able to get a job and to, work in America. But that's the idea. One group of sociologists believes that, yet again, everything is kind of blended together, works together. And as you can imagine, this is more the functionalist kind of view of things. Now, this other view of America is really this salad bowl theory. And a salad bowl theory of things is very different than the melting pot theory. So, look at that salad. It's very easy to pick out, like if somebody gave you that salad, you could pick out and say, I hate tomatoes, which my husband does, and you wouldn't have to eat them. Or those green peppers, or those radishes, or those carrots, or if there were olives or croutons or cheese, you could individually pick out the parts you liked, didn't like, and leave the rest. And if you hate salad, well, good luck. I guess you don't have a whole lot left. But this salad bowl theory of America says, look, America is just like a salad where there's all these different unique pieces. Yes, you can pour salad dressing on whatever you want, whether it is ranch or Italian or Thousand Island, and that kind of like is the glue, right, that keeps everything together. It's all mixed up, and there is kind of a similar identity. It becomes known as a salad. But there's still all these unique separate items. So what they're getting at here with this analogy is that, yeah, sure, great. People go out on the 4th of July and they celebrate America's independence. That's kind of like the salad dressing. But what they're saying is America is still made up of all of these different groups of people that don't necessarily get along. And it's really what we call cultural pluralism, the idea that there are these so many separate cultures or subcultures even within the United States, and they have their own different languages that they speak, foods that they eat, traditions that they kind of practice, which may be completely, different to you that you're not familiar with at all. And so there is this cultural pluralism theory, which, as you can imagine, is more supported by conflict theorists, where they say that America is never truly going to be a country where everyone gets along because they are so different. And even though they might have some things in common and love America and love its freedoms, which is why they came here, and celebrate their differences, they're still very, very different. Which one is true? I don't know. There's an argument to be made for each one. If you come in the Geneseo area, I would say it seems like we're one big melting pot. For the most part, everybody has similar values, similar traditions, similar beliefs. But when you go to a big city, this salad bowl theory seems so real, especially as you walk through like an area like Chicago, where you've got separate neighborhoods, little different neighborhoods, like Little Italy to Ukrainian Village to Chinatown. I felt so strongly when I was in San Francisco and we went to Chinatown, it seemed like we were in a different country. As we walked down the street, we were the only people speaking English. I'm assuming that they were speaking Mandarin. I don't know. I don't speak it. There were all sorts of different foods hanging from the window, which I didn't know what the heck they were. So it was definitely sights and smells and sounds that I was completely unfamiliar with and was slightly overwhelming, but also really cool. So when you get into different neighborhoods like that and their traditions, their way of life, their language, their foods are so different than what you're familiar with, it seems like America's more of the salad bowl and that I think the cultural pluralism is going on. But at other times, it seems like we're one big melting pot. So it's two different theories out there, and they're both pretty interesting. All right, that wraps us up for today. We'll continue with section 1 next time. Have a great day, guys, and don't forget about that extra credit. Later.